Welcome to this Delphi MVC Framework introduction. This is Daniele Teti. I am the CEO and CTO at BeTime Professionals, which is an Italian-based company, and also the CTO of Delphi Studio, which is a Spanish-based company based on Valencia. These are some of the book I wrote in the latest years, and I am an Embarcadero MVP. I'm the lead developers of some of the most used Delphi open source projects. Today we'll talk about Delphi MVC Framework. So what is Delphi MVC Framework? The MVC Framework, for short, is a very popular, powerful open source framework for web solutions. It is open source with an Apache 2.0 license and supports web API development, RESTful and JSON-RPC API as well. And it allows also to develop server-side rendering website or applications. The resultant API produced by Delphi MVC Framework is not Delphi specific, so that the web API can be used from any kind of client. So the client can be Delphi, JavaScript, Python, C#, Java, Go, really what you want. And the client can run into the browser or from a mobile phone or a tablet or a handheld or some rugged phone or just a classic PC or Mac. The MVC framework is powerful, but it is very simple to use, and you can be productive in minutes. By the end of this introduction, you will be able to develop some simple APIs. The Delphi MVC framework project can be deployed as is with a built-in web server, or as a Apache module, or is API DLL, or also as a Linux daemon. The MVC framework supports from Delphi 10 Seattle to Delphi 12 Athens. You can just use the MVC framework if you are on one of the latest version of Delphi. It works on Windows, Linux, and Android too, and supports push notifications, a sort of push notification using the server-side event, and the JSON Web Token, HTTPS, templates, and many other things. It also supports OpenAPI, formerly known as Swagger, and provides advanced support for Active Record to easily handle data and business logic. About the support, the MVC framework is the most popular Delphi library, let's say, on GitHub. And what makes it great an open source project is the community. Official Facebook group about the MVC framework has more than 6,000 members, and it's written at this address, and there are more than 14 active contributors from all over the world. For the MVC framework is available also professional support and funding. About the professional support, training, and consultancy, my companies, which is betimeprofessionals.com, can provide such kind of support, so custom development, training, consultancy, and so on. Also, if you want to fund the project, you can buy the official book or subscribe your support account on Patreon. On the Patreon page, you can find many contents, articles, video about the MVC framework development, and so on. About the book, this is the DMVC framework official guide. It's available as an ebook in English, Brazilian, Portuguese, and Spanish on the tab, and it is also available as a hard copy on Lulu, just in English. I have to thank you, our main sponsors. We have a lot of sponsors, but this is our main sponsor, which are all the BeTime group, and also Centro Software, Delphi Studio, Orion, and Viva Ticket, which are companies that actually asked for some implementation on the MVC framework and then released that to the community, or just founded the development of the MVC framework. So what kind of application can be built with the MVC framework? With DMVC framework, you can build backend application servers for mobile, desktop, and web, and RESTful APIs, and JSON-RPC 2.0's web API, which are very interesting, as we'll see in a moment. And also you can write server-side rendered, also known as classic web application using SSV technology. And you can doesn't matter which kind of deployment you choose, you can set your server with HTTPS. This is the anatomy of a DMVC framework application. As you can see, for any DMVC framework application, you have one DMVC engine that contains at least one controller that contains at least one action. So a controller is nothing more than a class that inherits from DMVC controller, and the actions of a controller are just controller methods which are decorated with specific RTTI attributes. The MVC engine can also use one or more middlewares. But as Linus Torvalds says, talk is cheap, show me the code. So let's create a DMVC framework web API from scratch. So let's create our first Delphi MVC framework project. After the installation, you can see the installation process on the website, on the GitHub, or also on the book. You can find the installation. It's quite simple. You get a new items here in the menu, Delphi DMVC framework, Delphi MVC framework project. Create a new Delphi MVC framework project with a controller. Click OK. And this is the main project wizard. This is the updated version for the Magnesium beta version, which is the upcoming version that will be presented at the next IT DevCon. But it's quite similar to the current stable one. So let's remain all like this and just click OK. The wizard is going to produce the project as is, which is composed by a main program, which actually runs the server, which is configured using some sensible defaults and so on. There is one controller. We'll talk about this controller, which actually does something, just is not an empty example. And also the web model. The web model contains the MVC engine creation and configuration. But without changing anything, just click Run, and you get a working server. This version has a console logger which show any activities of the browser. So let's start to use this server. We don't know currently how all these attributes works, but just to use something, we can start with a simple utilization, 8080 API, reversed strings, Daniele. We issue the request and then get the result. This is the result. The service handled the request and redirected these requests to these methods. Unit 13, TMyController get reversed string, which is this method that just reversed the string. So how all this stuff actually works? Let's go back to the slide to understand something more. The first topic we want to talk about is the routing and the request parameters. The controller, which is our working class that handle the requests from the client, is addressed using the first part of the URL. Then the action are selected using the remaining part of the URL. To understand which controller we have to select or which action we have to call, we are using some attribute that we will see in a moment. So far, for now, we have to understand that when I write www.myserver.com/people/rom/Daniele Teti, I'm actually select the server name, obviously in the usual way, and this is the controller, which is not the first part separated by slash, but it's just the first part. Okay, so if the router tries to find the controller selected with this part of the URL. So this part is used to identify the controller, and then the remaining part is the action and the parameters, the optional parameters. All the routing works using attributes, RTTI attributes, which is a specific feature of Delphi language. The first attribute we want to see is the MVC path attribute. This is the most important and mandatory attribute because it's used to specify the URL that address the controller and the action. The full URL that I wrote on my browser or on some kind of client is a pair of the controller and action URL, which is split between the MVC path assigned to the controller and MVC path assigned to the action. An action can have more than one MVC path attributes, and all of them will be used to match the URL. The MVC path can define URL mapped parameter using the parentheses $param name parentheses notation. So this is a controller, and as you can see, here we have a normal class inherited from TMVC controller. So this class is a controller because inherited from TMVC controller, and a method which is actually an action. As you can see here on the controller and here on the action, I use the MVC path to let the router, the DMVCFramework router, to understand the URL that I want to be select this action. So when I wrote /people/Daniele, I'm actually calling this get Daniele. But also with this URI and this URI, I'm going to call the same get Daniele because the routing is not dependent by the query string parameter. So when I write people/Daniele, I'm actually calling this get Daniele. Okay. The MVC path also allows to define parameters. As you can see with this notation, open parentheses, parameter name, close parentheses, I can define a placeholder for parameters. So when a user write /people/2, for example, the router actually called this get person, understand this $ID parameter, and then inject it here. So I can just write the code inside this get person action using this ID, which is 2 in this case. Okay. Other examples, I can put many kind of parameters on the MVC path. In this case, I have blog/post/category/category. This is the parameter. So if I try to issue a request to the server using blog/post/category programming, I'm going to call this method, using the programming category. Okay? In this case, I'm doing the same things, but using the post ID. So the URL that is actually called, that which actually calls this action is /blog/post1234, for example. And here, the post ID parameter, which have the value, will have the value 1, 2, 3, 4. This is how the basic of the routing works. Parameters placeholder can be intermixed with fixed URL part as is defined here. So I can have /post, /params, fixed, /params, another part fixed, another params, and so on. Clearly, in the sign of the function prototype here in the action, I must have the same name of the placeholder as parameter name. Using the same name, which is case sensitive, automatically the MVC framework inject the value from the URL to my action. Another very important attribute is the MVC HTTP method, which is used to specify the HTTP verb to which the action can respond and is fundamental part of a well-designed API. It allows to discriminate the action to execute according to the request HTTP verb, which is a crucial feature of the RESTful system. Which kind of method I can use there? I can use all the HTTP standard method, other method which is not so popular, but so common, but they are used. So get, post, put, delete, add, options, patch, trace, all the method defined in the enumeration. How I can use the MVC HTTP method? This is a way to use the method. In this case, this get article is actually called if the URL matches and the HTTP verb is get. In this case, if the URL is /blog/post and the request is done using a post. In this case, using a put. As you can see here, we have another attribute applied to this parameter, this MVC from body. What does it mean? When a request has a body request, then using this parameter, the MVC framework can try to parse the body request to automatically create an instance of a tblog post. Just like, as in this case, here I can inject ID. I can inject the same thing here using MVC from body. So this ID comes from the URL. This blog post comes from the body of the request. Other method order declaration method. Let's check these two actions. As you can see, they seem different, but in terms of routing, they are the same. Because in this example, get Daniele is never called. Because when the client issue a request with /customer/Daniele, the order of method scanning starts from the top to the bottom. And then the first method it encounters is this one. And it tries to get this parameter, which is Daniele, and convert it to an integer, which raises an exception. So remember, the routing is done on parameter names and count, not types. So this is the correct order of parameter. Just put the most general root at the end of the similar ones. This is quite simple. It's almost the same concept that you use when you have to handle multiple exception block. Okay, put the most general root as the end of the similar one. These are some of the other DMVC framework attributes, which allows to finely tune the way in which the routing happens in the MVC framework. Just as documentation, and you probably already know, this is a very popular approach to handle resources. Remember that in RESTful approach, you don't have resource mapped one-to-one to a table. This is an anti-pattern if that table is not really a complete resource. But a resource is just an aggregate root. It's just something that makes sense in the problem domain space. So this is a very popular kind of API where you have slash people, for example, asked with get, which returns the people list, or asked with post, which creates a new person, or slash API slash people slash one or something. You should with get, which returns the person with ID equal to this value, or put with update the person, or delete, which deletes the person. So let's talk more about the URL mapped parameters. The URL mapped parameters can handle directly the following data types: integer, 64, single, double, expanded, boolean, tdate, tdime, tdatetime, tgrid, and string. The mechanism is always the same. The framework just understands how to convert the piece of URL into the data type needed by the action. In this case, it doesn't need a conversion because it's string. In this case, try to convert the value to integer. In this case, into a floating point number, or also datetime using this format, which is resemble the ISO without the time zone. Or in this case, we have the date, time, the boolean that can be true, one, y, and so on, just to define the true and false. Parameters can come from the URL, but also from the body, as we see some minutes ago. Using this attribute, we are instructing the routers to get the parameters from body, but also can arrive from a list contains in the body, which is a collection of something, for example, a JSON array, or we can get the parameters from the query string using these other attributes, MVC from query string. So if I have a parameter named from date in the query string is injected here and converted to tdate type. Or also from header. I want to inject some HTTP header as parameter into my action. I can just use MVC from header, and the parameter is automatically injected. Also, I can also inject parameter from cookie. So MVC from cookie and just inject it as the cookie. Good. Let's talk about responses. Responses are returned to the client in three main ways. There are a lot of ways to prepare the response for the client, but these are the main ways. The first one is using procedures as action and using render something method. This is the historical way, and it is also the way that you will find in the book. But currently, if you don't have a very good reason to use, just use the other one. Okay. So this is a procedure as an action, and using render to render the response. Otherwise, the second way is to use function as actions, also called functional actions, and returning a plain data types. The result of this action is automatically serialized and freed if needed. For example, you can have this get person, which gets an ID, and return a T-person. This T-person will be rendered and freed automatically. The status code of an action in this case is always 200. 200 if not otherwise defined So it is always 200. You can also using function as actions, but don't returning a plain Delphi data types, but an IMVC response. In this case, you can completely handle the response and also the HTTP status code. Let's see some example. In this case, we have the most flexible way to do the rendering, but sometimes it's too much flexible. And so don't use it if you really need it. Maybe in a project with 100 of APIs, you did this kind of render maybe five times, more or less. You have an object list, just populate it, and then render it using this way. This is one way to do the render. This is probably the most simple way to do it, which is very simple, and use it whenever you can. The serializer decides the JSON response shape, because if it is a normal object, it is a non-list object, it just returns a JSON object. If it is something which resembles a list, internally each user mechanism based on duck typing, if it resembles it, it seems a list, then it uses a JSON array to render it, or a binary stream if if you are returning a stream, and so on. The status code in this case is always 200. The third one is probably the most simple and flexible. So it's the suggested one to do it. The data are always wrapped into a data JSON property. So the response is always a JSON object, which is a best practice. The status code depends on the kind of response method used. So in this case, all these functional actions returns an IMVC response. In this case, is returning an OK, so 200 with the data of the person, of this the person object. In this case, we are returning a 204 for no content. In this case, we are actually creating a person. So we want to return a 201 response. So in this case, you can use the IMVC response returns. Okay, let's see some live demo about it. So let's start again with an empty project, new DMVC framework, Delphi DMVC framework project. Okay, let's select, let's cut this index and also this action, remove it, just leave create a sample crude action. Okay. Okay, here I have my controller, which is maybe the most important part where we are going to work and write code more often. The wizard generates also an entity, business entity, which is called T-person, which is defined as is, and we are going to handle these resource, this T-person resource. As you can see, the wizard already created a plain API. As you can see, you have /API/people, which is mapped on get people, /API/people /ed parameters, which is mapped to get person, and so on. Let's play with this let's play with these actions. Here I have HTTP PI, which is a client, a REST client, very powerful. Let's start the project. Okay, and go back to HTTP PI. As you can see, my server starts, it's running on port 8080, Let's see how it works. 8080 API people. This is our mapping API people and respond with this get people. Well, this is the code, this is the response. That's issues. Okay. This is what my action actually respond. Check, it gets this object list, populate it with 3 objects, and then respond with an OK response, passing these L people. As you can see, this L OK response has the parameterless version and also the version with an actual parameter, which is a T object. And this T object is automatically rendered. As you can see, the response has a data property, which is an array, which is mapped on this list of objects. And I have here 1, Peter Parker, date, date of birth, and so on. This object is declared in this way. And here I have an attribute which says that I want to render the property as camel case. I can also change this in case you want a different approach. For example, Pascal case. And then issues, what I want to say. And then issues the same request. I'm getting the Pascal case identified. But here we really like the camel case. Okay, there is also the snake case and so on. Okay, good. Let's go on. I have also another. Let's start the server. Okay. I have also this action that actually return a T person because I just want the plain object. This is the code. So I can get here API people 1 and issue this request to get this response. As you can see, the object has been directly serialized without wrapping, without anything. It is just serialized. All the public property has been serialized with the naming casing that I choose. In a similar way, I can send some data to the server on the body. Clearly, I have to use a post method or a put method. Also, if the standard says that also the get method could, the get and delete method could have the body response, but is not globally accepted. So let's stick to the most standard version. I'm quite lazy, so I'm going to copy one of the objects already returned. And now I'm going to call this create person using post. This person is automatically deserialized from the body, parameter per parameter, using the name casing we saw before. And then we just log something on the console and the file name on the file that it's the logger, because the log is on the console and also on the file. And the client gets a created response. I have this response. On the console, I have this created Daniele Teti, which is this line of log, and what the client asked for. This is an example, so the data are not actually stored, but it's just to understand how it works. The same mechanism is also for update person, which is mapped to the put verb. In this case, I have a URL mapped parameter and a body parameter. So I had this situation. I get this id is 1, and the person is equal to this one, and the response is an no content 204, no content response. More or less the same for delete, which doesn't have a body. I can just issue a delete and then no content. Okay. Now let's see another demo from the samples of the project, which is called renders. In this demo, there are all the possible renders available in the MVC framework. So let's see the particular the kind of demo there that we don't see didn't see now so far. Okay. Let's check some of these demo. For example, our renders can be also a polymorphic list. In this object list, I put T programmer object and T philosopher as well. The rendering is polymorphic, so can render a programmer and philosopher correctly. Let's see. As you can see, this is a programmer and this is a philosopher, which are in the same list but rendered properly. Because the MVC framework support polymorphism in the rendering. Another interesting renders is the renders of dataset. You can just render directly dataset if you want some, let's say, heavy query, or just want to render a result of a query, is quite handy. I have, for example, my data model, or I have my data set get from somewhere. I have my data model. It's a plain data model here. And then I can just create the data model, open the query, copy the data because the return data are freed. So I have to just not copy, I have to clone cursor. In FireDuck, you can use FDMM table, you can use also client data set, but I suggest you to use FDMM table with the clone cursor. Or you just, in this case, you could use also the render, which doesn't copy your data if you don't use FireDuck. In this case, I can just, with this very simple code, I can just code /func/customer/simple to get my dataset rendered. And it is sent. And just get my dataset. As you can see, there is support also for completely support for Unicode. This is Chinese, and this is Serbian. Okay. And you have, in this way, your dataset serialized to drive some website, some application, or just to drive a Delphi client. You can also send an actual file, an image, for example, /file/customer PNG. To show this, I can use a browser. No. just a browser, to get my image, which has been sent by the action. You can also retrieve directly a stream, a file stream. Okay, send file is a shortcut. Another thing you can do is to return, for example, a CSV. So you can use this /func/customer CSV. There it is, send, and just get your CSV, which is currently identified as text CSV. How to retrieve a CSV? Just set the content type to one of the possible media type, which are defined here, in this case CSV, then build as a string your CSV, using a string builder in this case, and just put it on the result. And you get a CSV. Good. Our next step to get in touch with Delphi MVC framework is to understand how it allows to handling data. The MVC framework is not tied to any kind of data access library, but if you want, you can use an active record implementation, which is really, really powerful and is built into Delphi MVC framework. And you can use it inside Delphi MVC framework or outside Delphi MVC framework. For example, in a visual application or console application, FireMonkey application, mobile application. So you can use this sub-framework of the MVC framework to use a high-level mechanism to handle your data. Our mechanism is based on active record design pattern, which is an architectural pattern found in software that stores in-memory object data in a relational database. It was named by Martin Fowler in his 2003 book, Pattern of Enterprise Application Architecture, the red and black book from Martin Fowler, which is highly, it's 20 years old, but it's really worth to read. And is really popular and available in many libraries for a number of languages. Many people know the active record design pattern just because of Ruby on Rails, and it is a shame because it's a very general design pattern. This design pattern, as we see here, map any field of a table or a view, or not any, a number of field of a table of view to a class attribute. So if you have the field last name, you can have in the person plus an attribute name, last name, or first name, a number of dependents, and so on. Added to this data field, you have also methods to cope with the CRUD of these entities. So one record on the table is mapped to one instance of a class, with one object, and all the methods in this class allows to handle the CRUD of the data, of this data, on the database. So you may have the method insert, update, delete, and so on. And also a set of methods which handles the business logic. This is the base design pattern. The MVC active record design pattern is a very good implementation which allows to do this and many other things. This MVC active record is an implementation of the active record design pattern and is a thin layer of object-oriented abstraction over FireDuck. And it is designed to be simple, just like all the DMVC framework library. And it's very good for CRUD application. So the MVC framework uses it to provide automatic CRUD for RESTful entities. There is a specialized controller which automatically takes an entity and expose it on as API, which is really, really, really powerful and can save you from days of work. MVC Active Record supports PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, Firebird Interbase, SQL Server, and SQLite, just without changing anything from your code. This is how an entity can be modeled. This is the class, which must inherit from MVC Active Record. Only the class are decorated with this attribute are actually entity. So MVC table, this is the name of the table. And in any of the private field, you have to set an MVC table field with the name of the field and the optional options of the field. In this case, I say that this table has this ID as a primary key and is auto-generated because it is an entity. And thus this F code attribute is mapped to codice on the database of description, descrizione, price, prezzo, and so on. And automatically this state of the class, this one, is automatically persist and retrieved from this table. MVC Active Record supports table inheritance, table splitting, so that you can have two entities which maps a part of a table, maybe 3 fields on an entity and 4 fields on another, or 10 and 20 and so on. And also table partitioning for horizontal partitioning or splitting of a table. And yes, an entity generator is available in the tools folder that you can set. You can define all the table from your database and just have the entities automatically created. There is also a mechanism to hook into an entity lifecycle. This mechanism is called events. MVC Active Record defines a number of events and calls them accordingly with the object lifecycle. These events are actually implemented as virtual method, so that you can just override this virtual method and hook your code in after loading, before loading, after insert, before insert, before update, after update, and so on. You can define really anything with such of entities. Let's see a live demo. Also, in this case, we are going to use for demo one of the sample distributed with the project, and you can find it into the Active Record Showcase. This is a VCL application which shows how to use Active Record, and it demonstrates also that you can use it also in a normal VCL application. Let's see our code. Here I have my T customer entities, which is declared from DMVC Active Record. This is just a layer super type from my custom entities. And here I have all the field mapped to the customers table. These are some advanced topics that we are not going to talk about here. This one is mapped in this way. And here you can just use something like that. DMVC Active Record count of the customer, and you get the count of the record in the table. Then you can create an instance. You can set the property and just call insert to create this record in the database. And all your business logic is here. Into T customer, you can put all before insert, after insert, before update, on validate, and so on. But also you can get a record by ID using this syntax, get by primary key, table T customer, and the value. You can change in something and then call update. Let's see that MVC Active Record also support nullable types. This last contact, for instance, is a nullable T-date time because on the database can be null. And so you can use these nullables, which are declared in the MVC framework.nullables, which allows you to use a number of nullable types: string, currency, boolean, date, time, and so on. Okay? So they are simple type that can be null, an integer that can be null. So let's go back to here. With this update, I can issue an actual update. The same thing using another style. So I already have the object and just called the load by primary key. And then I can delete it. This is the plain crude. But I can also create query directly passing the SQL using this method, because the framework must not be a block, a bottleneck to the power of SQL. You have to automatically generate all the boring SQL. But if you want to go deep and use specific feature of your database engine, you must be able to do it. Okay, this is the case. And then in this case, you can just get a list of objects mapped from the result of the query. In this case, I'm saying doesn't matter how I can get this data set, just put the result of this data set into a list of T customers. And this is really, really powerful. Also, I can get straight if I don't want to have logic on the result, because I just want to put some aggregates, something that doesn't need elaboration from your code. You can just ask for a data set. This is obviously a performance a way to improve the performance when you don't need to map your object and then serialize, or just map your object to show into a grid. Okay, just select data set, and it creates a new data set. Other things that you can say is get first by where, and you can put the criteria here, or you can use also very powerful name query facilities, where you can define the SQL query by name, for example, saying best customer, and setting the SQL that you want to be associated with this best customer. And then here, you can just call select by name query, give me a list of the customer, executing the best customer name query. And you get the best customer, the customer list. In this way, you can have your SQL not spread all over your source code, and maintain all the code clean. And you can also load this query, for example, from a file or something else. You can also put parameters clearly. In this case, for example, you can define parameter with this syntax. And you can also define different SQL for different database. For example, writing equals to par. I have this one for Firebird, and select this. The last parameter says that this query cannot be used for any of the supported database, but just for Firebird, or in this case, just for Postgres and not for the other one. If there isn't a specific engine to use, this name query is used for all the other ones. Then you can also call store procedure. You can really do anything, really. And you can also use RQL. RQL is a specific syntax that can be used to abstract your database engine, and also has the same form of an Excel formula, so that the users can also write RQL. In terms of SQL injection, it's completely safe. This approach and also this approach, because there is no SQL concatenation in terms of params. There is no possibility of SQL injection. Okay, this is what we can do. It is also possible, clearly, being developed with the multi-threading in mind. Can be used as in different background thread. You need to have a specific connection. So into the thread, you can set active record connection registry, add the default connection with the name of the connection. And then from this point onwards, all the connection are, all the instance use this connection. If you want to change the connection for the current thread, you can just ask to the active record connection registry to change the other connection name. It's really, really powerful. Another things that you can do, which is quite new, is the transaction context. You can use something like this syntax to automatically handle transactions for this scope. So you have to write begin var context equal DMVC active record use transaction context. And then if there is an exception raised in this block, the transaction is automatically rolled back. Otherwise, is automatically committed. And this is really, really powerful. If you want, for example, if you want to handle a method completely, to set the method completely on a transaction, just need to put as a first line or before of each connection to the database, after each database, use transaction context. And then this method is automatically from the point of view of the database. So this method is completely committed or rolled back. Really, really powerful. Another demo which is really interesting because it shows that the MVC framework can be used also for to provide API for Delphi clients, for example, and this really use this approach. Here is this CRUD project group. I have here this server which provides all CRUD API for the articles resource, so searches, ID, get by ID, updates, blah, 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 blah. Now I can run it. Okay, now this is the client. I have to run the server before. Okay, this is the server. And then now I can run the client. This is a normal VCL application. Many people think that the web API are usable only if you have something related to the web. So browser, JavaScript, no, that's not true. You can consume your web API from your Delphi client as well. Delphi is Sharp, Java, Python, anything. In this case, I have a simple application that I can open a data set. Data are actually retrieved from the server, as you can see here. Can close and open. This is the request to the server. I can go here, editing, for example, this one. This is Pizza Napoli 2. I can save it, and issues a put, and then I get the put for articles 114. And there is the server implements also a kind of business object. So I can put, for example, I can change the code and try to save it, but it says article code must be in the format blah, 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 blah. This is the server, which raises an error and is bubbled to the client. And then I can abandon the changes. All the stuff is created that and updated that is absolutely, let's see, updated from the server, so waiting for 2024. I can filter by description, for example, this is Four Season Pizza Quattro Formaggi, Carbonara, filter by description, and so on. It is just a client application which use data and business logic. This is really important. Having a client that issue a SQL statement to an application server which just get the SQL statement, execute on the database, and retrieve to the client, it is not a free tier application because your client is still a fat client. We are going, this is a thin client where the business logic and the data access layer, and very important, the business logic is on the application server. So that if you need to create another client, if you need to change your client, it's really, really simple to do. You don't have to recreate anything from scratch. Okay? So this is another very important demo which showed you how to handle in a very simple way, in a really standard way. It's not tied to something specific to Delphi. You can just open the data set. And here in the data set, this is a very simple implementation. You can do anything. After open, for example, I can just get the request with optionally parameter and just load JSON array from JSON object property. And it works because the DMVC framework adds to any T dataset descendant this set of methods to automatically retrieve and save data to JSON. So this is really powerful to work directly with a remote RESTful server. The latest demo we want to see about the active record is this one, simple REST API using active record, and show us how it is simple to create a very efficient, very properly designed API using the DMVC framework and active record. You have just to define your entities with all the business logic you want here. In this case, we are going only to map a database table, but we can do anything really. And then create a controller which handles that entities. In this case, customer. We can issue RQL query from query parameters. We can get by ID. We can create a new customer. We can create a set of customer using transactions. I can handle here a version with filter or non-filter. It is really, really powerful. And you can just create with 10 lines of code, more or less, your API completely agnostic. The latest thing we want to talk is the JSON-RPC API support in the Delphi DMVC framework. JSON-RPC is a stateless, lightweight remote procedure called protocol. It is a really, really thin, and it is transport agnostic. It works on anything. You can write just a message on a piece of paper and just pass to a colleague of you, and it can reply on the paper using JSON-RPC. It's completely transport agnostic. You can use plain socket, you can use WebSocket, you can use paper, can use, in this case, in the case of the DMVC framework, HTTP. It can be used really with the same process. It uses JSON as data format and support two kinds of message. Request, which is more like, which are more or less like function, remote functions, where you expect a result, and notification, which are more or less as remote procedures where you don't need a result. It is designed to be simple, so it is a perfect match for the DMVC framework. And the DMVC framework supports the latest specs from JSON-RPC and uses HTTP as a transport protocol. Let's see a demo. Okay, also in this case, we are going to use a sample provided with the project, which is called JSON-RPC with objects. I have here a DMVC framework, which has a particular things in this case. It doesn't have only controllers or doesn't have controllers, but has this particular method called publish objects. This publish object requires an anonymous method which returns a T object. This T object will be exposed. All the public methods will be exposed as JSON-RPC API automatically. You just have to call these 2 lines of code and it works. Okay, so let's start the server and then move to the client. The client can be any kind of client. The client just have to issue an HTTP request. But in this case, I want to show you a Delphi client because it's particularly well suited for inter-process communication or communication with remote objects, or also used or can be also used from a website, so a web application using Angular, React, or anything you want, because they are just HTTP requests, but are not RESTful requests, are JSON-RPC requests. So let's see how can be used in Delphi. Let's run the client. Okay, remember that here in the main web model, I published this TMyObject. This TMyObject has a set of public methods and nothing more. Really, there is no connection with anything in the MVC or anything else. You can also publish a data model directly and check how I can call a JSON-RPC method. Just create, if you want a client, you can use the MVC JSON-RPC executable, but it's really callable from anything. You can just have a HTTP client and a JSON parser, and it works. However, the DMVC framework simplifies a lot what you need to talk with a JSON-RPC server. I just created the JSON-RPC executor, send the endpoint, and then I created the JSON-RPC request. I can set the method name, that is the method that I want to be called on the server, set a random request ID, which is useful only to understand from which request the response that return will be referred to, So I can set the request, I can add the parameters, it can be also added by name in this way, and then just call execute the request with the name of the endpoint. And then the result, which is this lresp, contains a result attribute which can be parsed as integer, as object, as anything. Check out what you can do here. Subtract, and the remote method is called reverse string subtract with name parameter, which is this one. I can return object 2. In case of object, I have to do this kind of thing. All the exception, all the server-side exception are automatically transferred to the client, so there is no some dangling servers and so on. In this case, in case of the server side returns an object, you can just have this result.asObject and convert it to tJSON object and just read it as usual. You can also returns dataset, and automatically dataset will be retrieved. If you see this main this main data model contains a set of public methods, the search product, for example, which return a T data set, and our server just publish this data model directly. So if you have your data model, which provides some method, you already have your JSON-RPC server. It is really, really simple to do. There is really no way. Don't be afraid to go on the API, because the DMVC framework is really simple to use. It can help you to go really, really fast. If you need any support, we can get a lot of consultant which use the DMVC framework, and we from BitTime Software, BitTime Professional, which is a part of the BitTime group, can help you in anything about it. And that's it. It is really, really simple, as you can see. If you check this get multiple data set, for example, or this get data set, you can just set the method name, add the filter, execute request, and then load from T value to get the result of the interrogation. It is really simple. There is no this is anything. There's no complexity here. Okay. All this stuff can be also done using an asynchronous approach, always in Delphi, for example. I can use this asynchronous approach with this execute the request async. This is the endpoint, this is the request, and this is the anonymous method that will be called when the response is ready. Okay, so asynchronous. Okay, let's go on. So we reached the end of our presentation. I hope that has been interesting. In this introduction, we really just scratched the surface of the DMVC framework features. The DMVC framework is battle tested by more than 13 years of production deployments and continuous work. It is used in bank, hospital, factories, ERP, remote desktop software, industries, video industry, government, press, and many, many other fields. I really don't know how many fields, in how many fields the DMVC framework is used. And feel free to explore. All the samples we saw are free. There are more than 60 examples to understand all the minimal part of the DMVC framework. There are also many videos on YouTube. If you use the DMVC framework, it is an open source project, so feel free to support the project on Patreon or buying the official book. And if you need consultancy, custom development, or trainings, these are available from BitTime Professional. Just drop me an email. So, what other to say? Thank you for your attention and see you. Bye-bye.